And today we're going to talk about emergency protocol. And I was wondering, that might be like an evergreen topic too. If we ever have someone who goes through something, they can always share, what they learned. And um, I've been talking to WORT too, who had a shooting. And they're not in a position to talk now, but I think they're open to it in the future. So that could be someone else we could hear from. Um, and Davyne was very generous to do an interview with Bennett Kobb, right? Is that his name? Yeah, with KPFT and their experience with the bombing way back in the day. So she's going to share that, and I'll let her introduce it. She and I discussed. We're recording now and then recording afterwards, maybe with some questions. And then if we get into some sensitive questions, we can turn the recording off. Do you guys feel okay with that plan? I see a couple shaking heads. No one's screaming no, so I'll take that as a yes. Okay.
And Davyne, I watched the video. I think it's fantastic. Thank you. I have to leave early today too, not because I'm not interested, but because we're having a discussion about the future of KHOI. But I did see it, and for anybody who has not seen it, it's definitely worth watching.
Thank you.
It's really good. So with that, I'll turn it over to Davyne. Thank you.
So, hey everybody, I am Davyne Dial with WPVM in Asheville, North Carolina. And somehow along the way, a couple of weeks or 3 weeks ago, something about station security came up. And I remembered that Bennett Kobb had mentioned that he had been at KPFT when that bombing happened. And so I invited him to come to our roundtable, and he said at the time that he would be on the clock then, and so he was not able to do it. But Bennett was a young teenager, maybe even prepubescent, when that bombing happened. So he's been in radio over 50 years, which is half of commercial radio history, which is pretty phenomenal, I think. So the first broadcast on commercial radio was in November of 2020. And so this happened in 1970. So it's 50 years ago. So he is on Facebook. So is very willing to share more information, but he's with FEMA. And in the introduction of the video, I address his position, and he does get into some FEMA IPAWS issues in this video. So am I on share screen?
You should be able to, yeah, give it a shot.
Is it showing?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, great. So let me get.
Hello, this is Davyne Dial with WPVM in Asheville, North Carolina, and I have Bennett Kobb with me today, who has been in radio over 50 years, which is pretty incredible because I love talking to people who've been in it that long. So here's some information about Bennett. He's a public relations specialist for IPAWS, the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System at FEMA in Washington, D.C. He began his radio career at KPFT Pacifica Radio in Houston, Texas, and worked at 6 additional stations in Houston and Austin and in Boulder, Colorado, where he also worked in broadcast engineering. As a business and technology reporter, he covered the FCC for 20 years for trade publications. Bennett is a volunteer at WERA in Arlington, Virginia, which many of us on this roundtable are very familiar with. And he's on Facebook and can be found dispensing sage advice to community radio stations, whether they ask for it or not. Welcome, Bennett. How are you today?
Thanks, delighted. Delighted to be with you. It's after a couple of cold days, we're having a lovely day here in the DC area, and I've been out wearing my KPFT hat.
Oh yeah, it's very attractive on you.
That's where our story begins, I guess.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, so recently in our roundtable, Pacifica roundtable for station managers, the subject of safety and the bombing of the stations in Houston came up, and I remembered that you had said you were there. So, so burning ears want to know all about it.
Well, I was a pre-teen volunteer at KPFT in Houston, my hometown. I was not present. No one was present at the transmitter when it was bombed, thank heaven. But obviously it had an enormous financial impact, psychological impact, as well as physical impact on KPFT and on the community radio movement. Pacifica Foundation had a long history of being associated with the left, and that was what attracted the attackers. KPFT had not been on the air for very long in 1970 when members of the Ku Klux Klan came and dynamited the station. The remote transmitter was in a rural area outside the city limits of Houston. The KPFT studio was in an office building in downtown Houston, where I just love to hang out as a volunteer and answer the phone, stuff envelopes, and do whatever they asked me to do. I was just fascinated with radio at that time, and we can come back to that in the context of security practices as well. So when the signal suddenly dropped and no explanation could be found at the studio, they took a trip out to the transmitter in Stafford, Texas, and I'm going to try to share my screen here and show you what they found. Can you see this, Davyne?
Yes, yes.
This is a photograph taken from a ways up the tower. This is the full power Collins transmitter blown apart by dynamite. Mike August was the station manager at the time. That's him in the upper left area, turning his head. Mike is still involved in community radio in Texas. Let me bring up the next image here. What a complete mess. But incredibly, they pulled things back together and raised money and rebuilt the transmission site in a concrete bunker. It was designed to withstand attack, but a full power transmitter like this generates heat, and it had to be vented to the outside. And so there was a small opening, which is where the Klan guys came back, piled more dynamite on this opening, covered it with sandbags, and blew the force of the blast back into the transmitter, and the station was bombed for a second time.
So the sandbags would force the impact down instead of up, so it could do the most damage.
Exactly. And of course, for quite some time, there was seemingly no action on this case. And to understand this, we have to see that we have to understand that the KKK had a long history in Texas. And in fact, the Klan for many years in the South had extensive penetration into public safety and really government at all levels, including, of all things, the Postal Service. The chief of police of the city of Houston said publicly he didn't care for this station and didn't know why the FCC allowed KPFT to be on the air. The sheriff said much the same thing. There was a great deal of suspicion that the law enforcement was not making much progress. But when the station was bombed the second time, people stood up and took more attention, including others in the broadcasting community who wondered that they might be next. In fact, it turned out that the team from the Klan had threatened another station in Houston with a bomb threat, a top 40 station that wasn't involved in any kind of progressive politics or controversy. This is a photograph of a Houston police officer with the police department emblem on the car, wearing his Klan hood. This is not a fake image. It became known that there were plenty of Klansmen in the Houston police and elsewhere in Texas police and sheriff's departments. And this helped to explain why the authorities were dragging their feet on finding the perpetrators. Eventually, the public pressure from various sides got the case moving, and several men were found to be involved. The FBI had an informant in the Texas Klan, and this informant identified the ringleader, a man named Hutto. And in fact, these guys were actually arrested on their way to California to bomb KPFA in Berkeley and KPFK in Los Angeles. And thank heaven that they were stopped before that. Hutto was convicted. I believe he died in prison. And something a little bit ironic about that is that KPFT has a long history of programming for prisoners and helping the families of incarcerated persons. I don't know if he lived long enough, but if he'd had a radio in prison, he might have been able to listen to the radio station he helped to try to destroy. This is KPFT's building in the Montrose area of Houston, where they moved after the downtown address. And about 5 years ago, they inaugurated a brand new all solid state full power transmitter. That's the station manager, Dwayne Bradley, with it. And so this was just a terrific thing. They were able to raise money with a fundraising program called Transmission Possible. That's where I got that cool hat. So although KPFT is owned by the Pacifica Foundation, it's always been a Texas-oriented station with Texas artists and Texas culture, and identifies itself as Houston's community station. And although I'm in Virginia here and no longer associated with KPFT, I still listen online, and I'm very proud of what they've done at that station.
So when we had our pre-recording kind of conversation, you mentioned some tips on getting, I guess, to a more favorable place with your local law enforcement, so that perhaps if something terrible happened, that they might see you not as the enemy.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea for, at a minimum, to have your local authorities know where your radio station is, and to cultivate, if you can, good relationships with your local government. Here in Arlington, Virginia, our LPFM actually houses its transmitter in the county 911 emergency radio room. There is a close relationship there with the county government. Before I move to some possible measures you can take for safety and security, I do want to answer the question some people may have, which is why did the Ku Klux Klan target this radio station? They had been targeting any type of leftist organization, including a progressive newspaper in Houston called Space City. And by all accounts, they had protection from the Houston police for these actions. Of course, the Klan was known throughout American history for church burnings, cross burnings, kidnappings, lynchings, beatings. But in the 70s, they sort of expanded their portfolio from white supremacy to socialism and communism. And even though KPFT had not been on the air for very long, and a lot of it was broadcasting music, they targeted Pacifica as some kind of a communist operation. This is what they did. So this led us to a conversation about paying attention to station safety and security, especially in this polarized environment that we have today, with people allowing themselves to disbelieve actual reality. As we speak, in my home state of Texas, they're trying very hard to pass legislation to make it much harder to vote. We've had this attack on the Capitol. And so people are very polarized, and it's not outside the possibility, the realm of possibility that if a community radio station aired political content, controversial content, or people who do not otherwise have a voice, that, heaven forbid, they might be targeted. And of course, community radio stations are in the public eye. They're not hiding, they're broadcasting. Hopefully they're known and understood and valued by the community. So that's why I think it's worth thinking about risk reduction or risk management at the station. Access control is one of the things that we discussed. And, as a kid interested in radio, a buddy of mine and I really enjoyed visiting radio stations. We wanted to start a career in radio when we were in high school. And one of our favorite tactics, if we didn't get invited ahead of time, was simply to go and find the back door of a radio station and wait until somebody exited, and then stroll in, trying to pretend that we belonged there. And this actually worked. We never got thrown out, but this brings to mind the issue of access control. So I believe at WPVM, you've instituted some electronic controls. Is that right?
Yeah, we have a keypad on the door that I issue when someone jumps through all of the necessary hoops to be part of the station, they're assigned a door code so that's what they use to get in. But the building that we're in also has an access card that anytime, so the building is open during the week between 10 and 4:30, but the rest of the time you need to use that access card. So we have double, and recently there was a new FCC update about where your transmitter is and where your antenna is, and that it has to be locked to get there. We're fortunate enough to have our antenna on our roof here, but it takes 2 sets of keys to get up into that equipment room where the transmitter is, and then another key access to get out there to where the antenna is. So we're not out in a field in the countryside somewhere. I feel like we're very fortunate because of that.
Many stations do lease space on commercial towers, and the FCC is often concerned about maintenance of that area. The tower needs to be registered with the commission. There needs to be a sign on the fencing. It has to be some security barrier there. The tower has to be painted and lighted if that is one of your requirements. And should you ever be inspected by the commission, they may be interested in whether the tower is being maintained properly. for aviation safety, and it's a subject that they have no sense of humor about.
Right, rightfully so.
If you incidentally, it may seem far from your mind, but I do really encourage stations of any type to be prepared for an FCC inspection, which can happen when you least expect it. They don't make appointments. You cannot ask them to wait or to come back another day. And they're not going to be snooping into your DJs or your song lyrics. They're mainly interested in physical things like we just mentioned, the antenna, if there's requirements there. They want to know if your emergency alert system device is on, is working and receiving the tests and you're forwarding the tests. And if you have a station log, which is a technical log relating to maintenance. So if there's issues in, perhaps you're not receiving the EAS tests, that has to be investigated and put in the station log. And anything affecting maintenance or unexpected off-air transmitter issues, anything like that has to be in the station log. Also, if you received requests from political candidates who want to appear on the station, there are special provisions for keeping a record of those requests and what you did about those requests. I recommend that the station have some sort of a note or sign on your front door that says this is a radio station, you know, what your station is, and in case of emergency, what number to call in case there's a fire or something and the station's unattended. That would be very helpful to have. I'm a big believer in backups in case there's some kind of an incident, again, a fire or loss of power or loss of the server, that you have your station records, your music, your programs on digital files on a server or your automation system that is backed up elsewhere. And so there are a couple of ways of doing this, actually 3 ways. I recommend all 3. First of all, you need to have physical disks, drives that are backing up your content and stored elsewhere in the station. This is a natural. You don't want to be caught with your whole station content on somebody's laptop that gets stolen or dropped, or you turn it on and you find it doesn't boot and there goes your program. You want to keep that on reliable storage. Next is backing up to off-site cloud services. This is services like Dropbox, Google Drive, Amazon Drive, or iCloud, or other Backblaze, other backup services that will store your content and help you to recover in the event you need that. Very, very important. And you can automate that process. But the third part of this, which I think is especially useful, as well as fairly inexpensive, is to back up your files to a server at someone's home who is associated with the station.
Is that the Synology one? Is that the one that you sent me a link to yesterday?
Yes.
Synology unit.
So Synology is one of the brands of network attached storage, NAS, which are simply file servers. They can have 1 or more hard drives in them. And the Synology NAS and other brands contain software that will back themselves up over the internet to an identical unit. It can be placed in another location, someone's home, and you don't have to pay any annual fees for that. You're just backing up one unit to another. I'll show you a picture of one of those units. This is a Synology NAS. This particular one contains 2 drives. They're not intimidating devices. They're not costly devices. You have a lot of choice, and it's a great way to store your music and store your station records and so forth. You simply attach these to your Ethernet network in your facility. It does require some IT knowledge to set up. It is also possible to use these devices remotely over the internet, but that requires some attention to security so that people do not hack into the device and find it and and try to disturb it over the internet. But yes, I do recommend the Synology. I've used about 12 different NAS brands, and I happen to like this one, especially because they're so cheap.
So give us a ballpark figure for something that would be adequate for a small station.
Well, I think you're going to be spending less than $300 all total, the unit and the drive. But you can put in 1 drive, 2 drives, 10 drives, solid state drives. You have a vast range of choices, as well as how you set the drives up so that they, in case one drive were to fail, the others are still online and contain your data. For IT people, this term is known as RAID, which is redundant array of inexpensive drives. And we're getting into the weeds of the IT weeds a little bit, but your IT people will know what that means.
Yeah, and so let me ask you about the hard drives. Approximately how many terabytes does like a under $300 Synology unit will hold? How many terabytes of hard
That's
drive?
based entirely on the size of the drives that you stick in the device. So you can get a terabyte drive, you can get several terabytes. It all depends on your data needs. If you get a unit that's got multiple bays for drives, whether it's Synology or other brands, or you build it yourself, that's possible too. You can just add drives to it. The reason I happen to like this one is because it comes with so many useful applications and automatic backups. Excuse me. Synology itself operates a cloud backup service called C2, which is very inexpensive. It'll also back up to Dropbox and many other services, in addition to backing itself up to another Synology unit that could be connected to someone's internet service at home.
Well, Bennett, for those of us just getting started on understanding this external storage of our important things, maybe in the future we could do a little interview about that, or have
maybe
some sort of little tutorial. I think that would be very helpful. It would certainly be helpful to me. So yeah, so go ahead. I interrupted you there. So go ahead. You were on RAID or RAID?
RAID, R-A-I-D.
Yeah, RAID. That's where you were.
That's right. And so that's what that is called. But the system is called network attached storage. I'm concerned, for example, if a station has all of its content on an automation system, what happens if that automation system goes down?
Like station playlists?
Sure, or any others. And music is one issue that's going to take up a lot of data. Your station records is another one, and then your audio program.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something for the management to think about. So these are just some basic measures: access control, backups, signage, knowing who is in the station, and hopefully propagating a culture of caring for the facility, caring for the security of the station, and supporting it. And I think that when that culture comes from the top, it will spread through a station, and people will value it and treasure it.
Yeah, I personally consider protecting the station and the license. That's my number one job.
Absolutely. And sometimes there's a culture at stations that, with regard to the license, that's an FCC matter, and the FCC is bureaucrats in Washington. We don't need to do what they tell us, and so on. And it's simply a reality that while the list of regulations that apply to LPFM stations and community radio stations is not a long list, it is there. Mm-hmm. And we have tremendous freedom in this country with our ability to broadcast through non-commercial stations. So it behooves all of us to know what those rules are, whether it's the technical rules or the ID rules or the station log. People ought to be aware of it.
So just one more question and then I want to hear a couple of old radio stories about Lorenzo and attacks on God, or God is mentioned there. So I think I understand from some of the support groups that I follow that some state broadcasting organizations, they will come in and do a check for you. And if you pass that, that is satisfactory for the FCC, from what I understand. Am I correct on that?
Yes, but there are a few caveats. In general, this is a great service. However, not all state broadcasting associations welcome low power FM.
Right, right. But when they do, if and when they do.
Or community radio stations. So you might want to take advantage of that service. But as far as passing an FCC inspection, there's not many things to be aware of. And you ought to be able to do it on your own, in my view. But people need to understand that they cannot delay an inspection and they cannot refuse an inspection. One of the things that comes up again and again is that people say, you're an FCC inspector, show me your search warrant. And this is a misunderstanding of the whole situation. First of all, when you have an FCC license, you have already agreed to follow the FCC rules, which includes allowing the commission to inspect your station. You can refuse an inspection, tell them to go away. That is itself a violation for which you will have to pay. And that happens all the time. I have been reading the FCC's daily documentation for decades and collecting stories of enforcement cases against stations. And when an enforcement action is levied against a station, especially a non-commercial station, it's usually for stupid reason, like refusing an inspection. They do not need a search warrant. They are not there to search the premises. They're there to inspect the station, apparatus connected with the station very specifically. And without that, the United States would not have control of the radio spectrum, which it has. There is an interesting story behind this, which has to do with a specific agreement that you make when you sign that license application. Everybody signs this. A broadcast applicant, an applicant for an amateur radio license, a cellular phone license, a satellite license. And that agreement says that I waive any claim to the radio spectrum as against the power of the United States. This agreement used to be a little bit more interesting. It used to say that I waive any claim to the ether. And it may seem kind of strange, but you have to remember that years ago, it was believed that radio waves were waves in the ether. A mysterious substance surrounded the world. And supposedly some physicists demonstrated that the ether doesn't exist, but I've heard that in more recent years, people are even questioning that conclusion. Well, but nowadays, it is assumed that there is no ether. So the FCC took out that interesting antiquated wording. But the reason for this agreement is in the beginnings of broadcast radio. And a lady preacher, famous radio preacher, Amy Semple McPherson, who broadcast over the air and refused FCC inspection and said that she doesn't listen to the FCC, she listens to God and has to be on his wavelength. And
isn't that Seventh-day Adventist?
I don't remember exactly what her faith was.
Or Christian Scientist. It's one of the two that I'm associating her name with. Go ahead.
So broadcasters of that era said, well, we're already on the air. We already have this frequency. Go away. And so the FCC was empowered to require that you waive any claim because of previous transmission. So you waive any claim. The United States has a power over the radio spectrum. Broadcasting is a privilege, it's not a right. For radio and television stations, it's based on your promises to serve the public. And in my opinion, non-commercial stations especially do that every day. So you do not have any out when the commission makes an inquiry. If they write you a letter, you have to respond promptly. I'm familiar with a station in Ohio that got an FCC letter, ignored it, and because it was ignored, the FCC ordered them off the air. Commission doesn't like to have its inquiries not be answered. And the station ignored the command to go off the air. And so this is a long-running legal case with this particular LPFM station in Ohio. We don't know how it's going to turn out. Do not ignore these requests. If the Enforcement Bureau shows up at your door, perhaps as unlikely as that may seem, they carry official identification. They have a special sort of FCC badge. They're usually nice people, unless you're a pirate operator. And you have to let them in. And they're principally going to be interested in the EAS and in your station log, and then be satisfied that you have control over the transmitter.
Okay, so tell us about Lorenzo and the repercussions of their story about God.
Hopefully everyone here has at least heard of Lorenzo Wilson Milan, an extraordinary person who sought to start a Pacifica radio station here in Washington, D.C. and was refused at that time. And he just waited and waited for the FCC to act on his application. And he found out the reason for the delay was that Pacifica at that time was considered to be a communist organization. Of course, today we do have WPFW, the Jazz and Justice station here in Washington, D.C., but he could not get a Pacifica station going at that time. And so he went to Seattle, where he started KRAB, a legendary non-commercial station with Jeremy Landsman, my former boss, wonderful engineer. And he went on to start several other non-commercial stations, KCHU in Dallas, KDNA in St. Louis, and many others, including another station, to overuse a word, legendary, a commercial station, KFAT, KFAT Radio in Gilroy, California, garlic capital of the world. Fin may be in, but fat is where it's at. So KFAT was an amazing station. Also, I think some books and movies have been devoted to that. Now, and to this day, there is a KPHT LP that is carrying on that tradition. Lorenzo was a polio victim. Polio also killed his sister and took away the use of his legs. And he wrote books about disability. And this person who underwent extraordinary suffering, physical suffering, nevertheless contributed so greatly to our communities through community radio. He wrote a book called Sex and Broadcasting, which has nothing to do with sex, but it's a book about starting a community radio station. I highly recommend it. He also authored a book called The Radio Papers, a collection of his writings through his adventures. And I first learned about Lorenzo and Jeremy when I was in a broadcasting program in college at the University of Texas. Somebody loaned me these books of his. And one of the books was called The Petition Against God, which is a bizarre episode in the history of the FCC, the history of broadcasting in the US, that we're still feeling the effects today. Lorenzo and Jeremy felt that granting non-commercial educational radio licenses to churches and religious organizations was a questionable thing, considering the separation of church and state. And they petitioned the FCC to take another look at this and consider whether this was the right thing to continue doing. The FCC rejected this petition, but the story didn't end there. The news got out to the religious broadcasting community, and it generated millions and millions of protest letters to the FCC long after the petition was denied. The commission had to put out a special brochure, which they had to mail in large quantity, called the FCC and Religious Broadcasting or something like that, pointing out that the petition was declined, that the government does not have the right to tell people they cannot broadcast religion over the air. People who are of various faiths, and people who cannot attend church services can enjoy their services over the radio, and everything is fine. But this continued to dog the FCC, and it made clear through the years, Davyne, that the FCC did not want to touch religious broadcasting at all. And to this day, probably the majority of low-power FM stations are church or religious licensees. Well, I spent a lot of time at the FCC as a reporter, and one day my old boss, Jeremy, was at the commission, and I said, Jeremy, come with me. And I brought him to the office at the FCC where the long-suffering commission employees answer calls and letters from the public. And I said, do you still get complaints about the petition against God? You know, the Landsman Milan petition? And they said, do we ever? Every day. They showed us a log of phone calls. Yeah, this is in the 90s. A log of phone calls and messages, people still complaining and asking that the FCC reject this demonic petition. And I said, well, that's Landsman. So we all had a good laugh, and he wasn't arrested. And that was my FCC story. So if you wonder why the commission, even today, is still very willing to entertain religious broadcasting in all of its conservative display, this may have something to do with it. And Lorenzo wrote a wonderful book about this affair called The Petition Against God. I don't have a copy. I seem to recall it had a lot of pictures of fish in it for some reason. But, the book is around on the net, and Lorenzo went on to his reward just a few months ago, I guess. There was a tremendous obituary in the New York Times, and having spent a little bit of time with him was just wonderful to see this extraordinary person, inspiring he was.
Well, thank you for that radio history. We'll trip down radio history there. And I'm sure you've got many other stories to tell. And I want to thank you very much, Bennett, for generously sharing the information that you've given us here. I'm sure it's going to be very helpful to many of us out here in community radio land.
I'm going to read one sentence from a great book that I recommend, also besides Lorenzo's book. Steve Post was a famous Pacifica broadcaster from WBAI. He wrote a great book called Playing in the FM Band. Recommend that to anybody connected with Pacifica or any community radio. And there's a sentence in this book talking about how people are attracted to community radio. It said, there seems to be an invisible antenna which scans the souls of those who come to the station, which looks for people who have not squelched and buried whatever it is that makes them unique. So I hope that characterizes the people at WPVM By the way, I recommend here in closing that everybody visit the WPVM website for a great example of a great station, wonderful content, even dessert recipes. It's a station to emulate. So Davyne, you're doing a great job, you and your team.
Oh, thank you very much. It's been an absolute honor to be able to do this. So Bennett has some links that are going to be included along with this recording for those of you viewing this on the Pacifica Roundtable. And I think we'll be able to put them in the chat, or we'll get those links to you some way. And they're very helpful. So again, Bennett, thank you very much for a great interview.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.
All right. Bye-bye.
He is gracious. Boy, what a personality.
Thanks, Davyne. That was just a wealth of knowledge in like 30 minutes. I might as well start off with the chat. I see some people have posted some things while listening. Joseph posted that Sally Kane had said that the political rules apply to U.S. congressional members and candidates, and not necessarily to local tribe elections for our tribal council seats. And Fred asks, is Synology system subject to ransomware? That's a good question. I don't know if anyone would know that or not, but maybe someone would. Yeah, maybe that's something to keep in mind as we learn more about it.
Yeah, we can probably, ask Bennett, since he's up there in DC with the FCC. That was my reasoning to pay more attention to what he was doing, because apparently they've been doing this kind of external storage for some time, and that was the one that he has found that he recommended the most. So my guess is it's okay.
Cool. I see David answered too. Fred, Synology is a computer, and if it's visible on the wild internet is what? If it is visible on the wild internet is just subject to be only hacked and compromised.
Yeah, somehow my text got messed up there. Sorry about that.
What else did you say? Everyone, please ensure that your station's LAN network is well protected and with an up-to-date firewall and appropriate anti-malware on all workstations and servers. Yeah. Do you want to elaborate on that at all, David, of what you said about Synology? Or
Sure. Kind of briefly, Synology is a thing that sits connected to your network, and people don't typically log into it like they do a desktop computer or something like that. And so it's not as vulnerable to risks of malware, including ransomware. But if your station, if somebody is affected by malware such as ransomware, a Synology or another storage device like it could participate in that. That is, files might get stored on it, which would be subject to the ransomware. So it's not like someone can't just attach to the Synology or other device and upload ransomware directly to it. That's a little bit more difficult to do, although not impossible. But yeah, it's a computer. It's got bugs. Every computer on this planet has bugs in its software, and so you need to protect it.
Thanks, David. Any other initial thoughts after finishing the video? Mercedes.
Yeah, starting out with the history of the bombing of their transmitter site was interesting to me from the KKK, but just in general from alt-right groups, we have attracted attention recently from some alt-right extremists in our area, and now some online trolls on our social media. They're clearly fake profiles. They're, most likely we know who those people are. but Facebook won't take them down. And so, they find in their investigations that they're not fake profiles. It's like, okay, great job, Facebook. But I wonder often if, because we're renewing our FCC license this year, what kind of things are coming for us, because we are a liberal voice of facts in this otherwise sea of red alternative facts in our area. So that was an interesting thing that started out with that. Yeah, I wonder all the time about station safety and who we're letting into the building. And
Yeah, it's echoing. History is echoing. Do you use any of those approaches that he talked about for safety?
No. And we are really trying to get up to speed with that. But like most people know, we just switched to a new general manager who is going to do the things that need to be done. So hopefully we will get on board. And actually this week we are installing it's an emergency response system, but it's being paid for by the sheriff because they want it. And they asked us if we would be willing to add this thing for emergency response from the county versus the federal. And we said, yeah. So they're coming and they're paying for all the installation, and that's counting as an in-kind donation toward our station. But there's 3 different pieces of it. One is in the studio, one's at our transmitter site, and one is at the intent, or at the on the roof that they're going to install some kind of generator system, I think. So it's actually pretty great, but we're right in the throes of making sure that our security stuff and our emergency responses is on point for 2021.
Oh, that's good. David.
Hey, Mercedes, would you be willing to talk about that after it's installed? I'm curious to hear more about it.
Yeah, actually, so our new general manager really wanted to be here today, but we have a silent pledge drive coming up, and perhaps he could speak about it since he is intimately involved. So they intricately, but the 2 words try to become one thing with all of that. So I'll try to get him to come. He's been wanting to come to these roundtables.
Yeah, that'd be great. Any other thoughts on security issues?
I'd definitely say we're concerned about it here. We're similar to you, Mercedes. I mean, we live in Kentucky, so you can imagine. We've been, surprised, honestly, because there were a lot of buildings that were vandalized during when the Breonna Taylor case was really heated here, and there were a lot of protests. I personally believe most of the vandalization happened from people trying to make the protesters look like they were vandals. And those were the kind of people I'm afraid of, also attacking our building, which was not very far from Breonna Taylor Square. So we were kind of in the midst of it all. No one was in studio because of COVID. So I was like, well, if something happens in the building, at least nothing's going to happen to our people. So that was feeling good. And then just being able to hear the station being on air, like Bennett said, they knew when their transmitter got blown up because suddenly they were off air. And then it was interesting to me to hear them, and just imagining them being at the station trying to figure out like what's going on, what's wrong, and then they finally realized, oh shit, someone blew up the transmitter. But we, it felt good to make it through that time when everything was so volatile here in Louisville. And I was honestly surprised that nothing happened to our station, but being able to listen to it and hear it on air was always very reassuring. It's like you didn't need the security camera because you had the broadcast telling you that everything was fine. But I don't know what to say in terms of how do you protect yourself. You certainly don't want to stifle your DJs from saying things that are going to upset these hateful individuals, because I mean, kind of, it's like, you're doing something right if the KKK bombs your transmitter, but, not a problem we want to have. And I don't know what the answer is besides just trying to be very careful about who you let into your building. And then that's another whole issue, after COVID, because you want to be open doors and you want to be a real community space, but then there are these people that have ill intentions. So I don't know. I think it might be another whole conversation since we're getting late tonight, but I share your sentiment, Mercedes. Sure.
I'll just add that the reason that WORT couldn't talk yet was because they're in the middle of a lawsuit now related to the shooting, and I could find that article and send it to everybody. But it just puts stations in such a tough place, just like you were saying, of wanting to be, how do you balance that? Wanting to be an open doors for the community, but also protect everyone who's part of the station. That's tough. Davyne.
So we, in that presentation, we did address that we have a keypad lock on our door, and that helps tremendously on who comes and goes. I think that the situation that we're in now, which I think is still festering and is going to be with us for a while, requires that we be careful about who has access to your station, your equipment, and your announcers. And so that keypad that we got was around $400. It's by Sledge, SCHLAGE. And I think when I was looking at pricing them, I think they start around $250. They're very easy to program, and they'll stop people from coming in that you don't want in there.
I'll just say this though, not to spark fear. A door lock is just a polite request to ask people not to come into the building. If somebody wants to get in, they will.
Well, you don't want to make it easy for them.
True, true.
And that's a way of covering yourself too, right? Saying like you've done everything you can to make it a safe place. Yeah. But right, you don't want to just let your guard down either.
Whoa. So with regard to the keypad thing and building access, so we're in a historic building in downtown Chico that is 4 stories, and we're on the 4th floor, of course, but there are so many offices and people who occupy this building. So to get into the building, you have to be buzzed in. However, there's so many people coming and going from the building constantly. Some people who are just clients of some of the businesses, so they are going to hold the door open for whoever happens to be standing outside. So we have that problem. And funny enough, our new general manager, he's been staff at KZFR for 8 or 9 years, I would think, has had some people from the building say, hey, you can't come in when he's outside about to put his key in the door, and they open it. He says, oh, let me come in. They're like, no, sorry, I'm not going to let you in, because he's got a beard and long hair, right? So he's young, but the discrimination and the anti-homeless sentiment is so real in our town. But yeah, I worry about those kinds of things all the time, because we have a keypad, we have one of those, I don't know what it's called. It's like a little electronic thing that you slide past the, and it lets you in. We have some of those. Yeah. But still, I mean, once someone's in the building, our studio's not often locked properly the way our policy said it's supposed to be, and that's an issue.
Any other thoughts on this topic?
I'd say that's the same with us. We do have the Slage locks. I don't know who's saying it correctly, but we have those locks too. And same with us, Mercedes. Though once the DJs are in, and in the before times, it would be DJs there all day long. They would be having friends and family and whoever, and we were okay with that. We have them get permission. If they have someone who's coming on air, we need to pre-approve that, but we don't make them pre-approve if they're going to have someone just come hang out with them. At least we haven't in the past. And we won't be allowing guests right away when we do reopen. But it is a big deal because, yeah, like people just, they open the door, someone knocks. We finally had to, we're in a pretty busy area. And we finally had to put a policy in, like, do not open the door if someone knocks. I don't care if they're standing there staring at you, looking in the window, just ignore them. And if you don't know them and you're not expecting a guest, do not open that door. And that was like hard enough to instill in people. But then, in times when there's a lot of people there, you know, it would be very easy for someone just to act like they knew what they were doing. You know, they were a DJ, a member of the staff, whatever, just act like they knew what was going on and just knock, and someone probably would let them in. And now we haven't had the physical, you know, threat or action taken against us, but we did have someone who was a guest that was brought on air, which is now the reason why you have to get permission before you bring a guest on air. But he, I'm certain, came in to get on air to try to help us lose our FCC license. You know, so there's other ways besides bombing your station. They could F-bomb your broadcast, and that's pretty much what was going on. And luckily, I happened to be there literally the day after we launched our FM signal. So we hadn't even been on air, maybe right around 24 hours at that time. And it was planned. I think it was planned even with the help of the DJ, who's obviously not a DJ anymore. And, you know, I don't know how I don't know how you stop that if somebody, when you do have such an open space. And you just don't want to squash that, but it's just terrible how people will take advantage of it. And you just have to be aware that that could happen, I guess, at any moment. You have to have a way, you know, like thankfully we knew how to take the station off air right away when that started happening, you know, and I was there and I got the guy out of the, he almost like, you know, threw a punch at me on the way out when I asked him to get off air because he couldn't talk about putting a stick up his ass on the, you know, FM dial at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So, and then, you know, this is a whole drama. Davyne knows it turned into a whole lot more than that, but yeah, just that vulnerability of just opening yourself up and wanting to be so open. And then these people are just going to take advantage or have really ill intentions. It can happen. And we just really all need to be prepared. How are you going to deal with that if it does?
Well, I think several of us have had security issues. We certainly have had them. So it's not within, you know, there's 3 of us right here with them, or at least myself and Sharon and Mercedes, I think, mentioned an issue. So if we weren't in such difficult times, we might not have to be talking about this.
Right, and I know we've had stuff here too with things getting stolen. Yeah. So it's just part of it, I guess.
Well, it is scary because I think I hear a lot of our programmers, not necessarily a majority, but a lot of our music programmers saying like, we need to have less news and information. Not everything's political. We just want to play music. But what they don't realize is the whole station is political. Even though we're a 501c3, like Ursula was talking about in the beginning, we are absolutely on the left, on the political spectrum in our area. And when we have events, such as we're sponsoring Pride for the Stonewall Alliance that's here, we've gotten hate coming at us. And who knows what could happen when you're at an event. I know that after the Orlando shooting of the LGBTQIA community there, people were afraid to go out to events here in our area because they didn't want to be out with other people where the alt-right groups here were threatening to come and do something. And same thing with Black Lives Matter protests here after George Floyd's murder. People were afraid to gather, and some groups didn't come out that were made mostly of people of color. And so I think that people at our station need to realize that if you're going to be part of a group at all, especially an organization, that it's all that stuff that comes in. And sorry about, that's my my cousin, my client that I'm watching. So she's watching her show and she's very happy. Sorry about that.
So it sounds like a good show.
Dragon Tales.
Oh. Any other thoughts?
One
Good
thought,
thought,
one
Davyne.
thought, one thought about the future presentation that's coming up on human resources that I think can be tied into here is she's suggesting that when we have people join the station, that we have them sign a non-disclosure that they'll go on social media and elsewhere and trash the station when things go bad. And I think that kind of ties in here with issues that some of us have had in the past that can be harmful to our brand. Well, I hadn't thought about having people sign a non-disclosure, but I'm thinking about it now.
Really, I think that would be awesome if it worked. You know, it really would. It's just
Yeah, it's sad that it's come to that, but yeah, it seems like it's just another part of doing nonprofit community radio these days.
Well, it's that and the strange thing with social media that has given everyone the opportunity to have a microphone or a bullhorn out there, and the situation can get very dicey very fast with people who are unhappy, and then suddenly you're in the middle of being publicly stoned, and it's not good.
Mercedes.
So as you all know, we've been being attempted stoning since January, and it's ongoing, but it's quieted down. The problem with an NDA is you've got your people who, so an NDA, you have to be able to prove that they violated the non-disclosure, which means you have to have a screenshot, a voicemail, or an email, something that's written down. You can't legally record someone in California on an audio or video without their consent. But of course, if someone leaves you a voicemail, they know they're being recorded, so that's admissible. But most people know how to talk in the shadows and how to talk one-on-one with someone. And then you can't do anything about it here. We have a policy in our programmer handbook already about on-air attacks and on-air airing of grievances, that you're not allowed to talk about anything which disparages the station or our board of directors or any staff or any other programmer on the air. You're not allowed to do that. And we've had multiple people violating that since March and April, when we changed general managers, and we try to enforce it, but it's like a culture thing too. So even if you have a policy, gotta have the HR stuff to back it up. So I'm looking forward to that presentation very much.
Sharon.
Mercedes, how do they have to sign something with those policies when they become a DJ?
Yeah, so when we train our programmers, we have a whole orientation first, and then you have to do all your hours, and you're supposed to read the programmer's handbook. And then when you sign your FCC permit to be a programmer on the air, we also have you sign a thing saying that you have read, received, and agree to all the policies in our programmer's handbook. Unfortunately, during COVID, we revamped the handbook to include a social media policy and some other things that weren't in there before. And then we decided to do an e-sign type of thing where, you know how Uber or Lyft or PayPal or any kind of thing, any kind of service says your continued use of this product after this date is your consent to all of this. We tried to go that route with our programmer handbook and not require anybody to sign something. And now we're in kind of a legal gray area with it because some people say they never got it. But so our attorney says, get it in writing, have a written piece of paper for every single programmer. You don't, and I love trees, but I think that may be what we do have to do. So I don't know.
Yeah, our attorney is very serious about the paper too. I've tried to get it out of it a lot of times. She wants it written down. Yeah. Gosh, I had something else that I was thinking about. Oh, the social media thing. I think what Davyne said is really true. And the thing is that there's no repercussions for saying something that's totally unfounded on the social media. Like we as broadcasters, if we get out there and start saying something bad about somebody that's not true, we get sued for slander or libel or whatever. We're very protective about that. Of course, that can happen on social media and you can do that, but it's just people don't feel that legal weight like we do, I think, as broadcasters or as other journalists do. So they can just get on there and they just feel like they can say anything and do anything. They're not going to lose their job over it or anything like that. They're not going to lose any underwriters or something, so they just, and that's what has been really, that's been one of the biggest challenges of running a station to me, is dealing with that social media falling out when things happen. We really try hard to keep all of our programmers involved, but obviously there are situations that occur, and if anything from just not being able to schedule them in the right time to them breaking FCC rules, if you aren't able to give them the time slot they want, they will just get on that social media and go nuts. And like, I don't know, or if you have to take the show away from any reason, I've come to believe that they feel like it's so much part of their personality that it's almost like you're taking away part of their personality. And people really get upset and they just go crazy on the internet these days. And I think it's a really intense psychological challenge for people running stations and learning how to just process that and not let it affect you. I mean, we could, maybe we need a whole help session on that one day.
Yeah.
But I like Davyne, let us know how it goes with that non-disclosure. I think that sounds like a good idea. And I hate that. I hate that it has to be like that. But.
Well, she's going to come on and whenever Stephanie schedules it for the human resources questions. And that was one of the things that she suggested. And so
we're talking about next week, right?
I can't remember if next week is fine.
Okay, good.
I couldn't remember. I have to remember so many things these days. I look on my calendar and my calendar tells me, okay, well, today you're doing this. I can't remember a week away.
We have a couple of guys who do a veterans talk show, theoretically once a week if they show up, but and they do a lot of good stuff on PTSD and suicide and all those kinds of veteran issues. And there was an incident where they expressed some of their right-wing political views on the station's Facebook page. And we had to get back to them and say, that's not who we are. That's not what we do. Do it on your own personal Facebook page. But if it's the station's Facebook page, just talk about your show and leave it at that. And we don't have anything signed, and we don't have, well, we do have a lawyer, a member of our board, a real estate lawyer, but we don't have a lawyer telling us what to do and what papers to sign and all of that.
Did it resolve in a way that worked for you? They
were okay with it. They understood. And I've been in there, on occasion, I've been in the studio when they come in, parenthetically, they've never wanted to do work remotely and Zoom and Dropbox. They are the only ones who regularly still come into the studio and do their show live. But in any case, I've been there sometimes when they came in to do their show, and we've, talked about things and agreed to disagree and all very friendly. But
that's good.
I really want to talk more about these things. I need to go make lunch for my client, but I just appreciate the presentation. Your interview was great, Davyne. Thank you so much for that. Is there a link that you can share where I can watch it again or share it with my general manager?
I'm going to post our thing tomorrow on our page.
Oh, okay.
You just want the video.
If there's
itself.
A link.
Davyne has just her video.
Yeah, because it was a little spotty. The video was kind of spotty for me because through Zoom. But if you have a direct link, I would love that. But if not, that's okay too.
I did send Stephanie the links that Bennett had sent to me because for some reason I couldn't cut and paste it in the chat. So,
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can send that link that you sent me. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thanks, Mercedes. Well, maybe, yeah, we can keep, we could do a part 2 on this one too, if people want. Sharon.
Real quick, I know this has been great. I think a part 2 would be interesting. Thank
Yeah.
you, Davyne. Really interesting. Bennett is a fascinating individual. He did a great job. So cheers to him. I just wanted to say that tonight is the Grassroots Radio Conference monthly meetup at 8 p.m. Eastern time. So for everyone who can make it, we're going to be talking about, you know, possibilities of in-person conferences this year or what we're going to do with that. And then, and also Michelle Bradley of Rec Networks is going to come talk to us about the simple LPFM situation that the FCC is considering now, the potential to raise LPFM stations from 100 to 250 watts. If you haven't heard about that, we need everyone to comment and tell the FCC that that's a good idea. So I'll put a link, I can put a link in the chat with some more info about that. But if you haven't gotten a link to tonight's meeting and you want one, let me know. And I can set you up.
Okay.
It'd be great to see you. And
Thank you, Sharon. I'll be there.
Okay, great. Awesome. Thanks. But
And
good to see everybody again. I really
good to
missed
see
you guys.
everyone. And I'll put both links in tomorrow's email. The original link that Davyne made, and then the one that we did together as a group. I just want to make sure everyone was okay. Don't need to like delete anything. Nothing too sensitive. Looks like everything's okay. Okay, good on that front. And Sharon, you talked about having a session about talking about psychological stuff. Were you talking about when you have to cut someone off of a show, like talking about that specifically?
I mean, that would be part of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, just sort of a, you know, tough skin as management thing. You know, how do you, you know, maintain professionalism, make the hard decisions you have to make, and not get bogged down in the social repercussions. You know? Okay. Something of that nature. I don't know how we distill it
Right,
down.
it's kind of a broad. I'm sure there's more issues than just that.
But that is a huge one. I mean, when you have to, I mean, that could be a whole session when you have to let a DJ go. You know?
Right.
Because that's, to me, one of the very hardest things.
Okay, yeah, we could probably do both of those. I think people are more likely to come when they know more specifics of what will be discussed, so that helps. Okay. Anything else? I think that's everything. Keep enjoying Dragon Tales. Yeah.
The reruns are best. What if you think it's still on the air? Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Davyne.
See you all.
For your wonderful presentation. And we'll look for you next time. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.